How to understand the male ego. The term male ego gets thrown around a lot in popular discourse, often without any clear definition. In order to understand how the male ego shapes men's thoughts and behavior, it's important to draw attention to the ways in which it is socially constructed. In other words, much of what we consider to be the male ego is based on long-held assumptions and stereotypes about masculinity and maleness that have social meaning and have been, for the most part, unconsciously internalized by most men. Method 1. Understanding the relationship between self and society. Understand what the male ego is. Stemming from the work of psychologists and psychotherapists in late 19th and early 20th centuries, the ego can be defined most basically as the self. After all, ego means I in Latin. The ego is the part of the mind responsible for acting as the mediator between the forces and drives of the superego. In other words, the male ego is not only a reflection of the individual's self, but also of cultural definitions of masculinity and ideas about how men should think and act. Men's identities are thus shaped by social influences. Humans are social beings after all. Understand that gender roles are socially constructed. To understand the male ego, it is necessary to understand how gender roles develop and function in society. Gender roles shape how people think and behave. Gender roles are sets of beliefs and actions that develop within specific cultural contexts and are associated with a particular biological sex, male or female. The roles help to differentiate between the sexes, so that men are seen to be one way and women another. By occupying these specific gender roles, some individuals function better within their particular social context, while others may struggle. To understand the male ego, you need to understand how society shapes men's expectations of themselves. For example, most men don't really know how they came to be sports fans, or think that blue, green, and gray are boys' colors, while pink and purple are girls' colors. Learn the basic characteristics of the socially constructed male ego. The male ego is driven by recognition, attention, and action. Men are assumed to be more active beings who do important things, such as political leaders, soldiers, scientists, etc., and who are deserving of attention by others. In this vision of the male ego, men are driven by their physical strength, sex drive, and evolutionary biology as competitors for female attention to be competitive, to strive for greatness and power, and to avoid showing any emotion and weakness. Be aware that not all men feel comfortable performing these standard gender norms. A lot of men feel conflicted about having to be a certain type of man. For example, even though statistically the majority of men are heterosexual, what about men who don't identify as that? Or what about some men who enjoy pedicures and facials, things considered girly or feminine? It's important to find out how individual men feel about and respond to these social expectations of how men should be, because they will vary in each and every case. Method 2. Handling the male ego. Consider how social expectations shape men's handling of emotions. All men and women have emotions, even if they show them in different ways. Men who don't show much emotion still have emotions, but because of social conditioning, they have learned not to show their emotions too much or at all. This might mean that the man in your life might remain stoic when someone important to him dies. Learn to recognize emotion suppression. Men are often taught to suppress their emotions, which is not always the most productive way to deal with emotions. Suppressing emotions can create a disconnection between emotions and thoughts. This means that men might not even know what they're feeling. It is important for men to work on expressing emotions because emotion suppression can lead to negative physical and psychological effects. Because of emotion suppression, your man might not be able to discuss how he is feeling. If he's willing to work on this with you, realize that this will take practice and time. Challenge outdated stereotypes about men and masculinity. Unlike that old saying, men are not from Mars, and women are not from Venus. Men and women are much more alike than many people would like to admit. In fact, many scientists today prefer to discuss gender differences in terms of a broad continuum of possibilities, as opposed to a strict distinction between two straightforward options. It's important to avoid making assumptions about men and anticipate their behavior to conform to the gender roles and expressions you'd typically expect. Don't assume he likes sports, for example, or that he likes beer and hates chick flicks, which are all common stereotypes about men. Empathize. Try to understand where the particular man in your life is coming from when he does something that shocks or upsets you. Women also often feel pressure to conform to prescriptive roles about how women should behave and be feminine. Rather than write him off, perhaps show some empathy and understanding. In some cases, men don't even intend to subscribe to the male ego, but it just happens since they've been socially conditioned regarding how to act. Get to know his sense of humor. Studies have found that both men and women use humor as a way to complicate their identities as men and women, and experiment with the boundaries between them. But what is interesting is also how humor functions for men and women in terms of sustaining their particular gender roles in society. While some men might prefer making jokes that reinforce traditional gender stereotypes, such as those positioning women as inferior to them, other men might instead challenge those stereotypes by making fun of the way men have traditionally considered themselves superior. How a man jokes about his sense of masculinity and the conventional stereotypes that apply to men and women in his culture can tell you a lot about his personality and his willingness to conform to these stereotypes, many of which are outdated according to recent scientific research. Become closer and more intimate. The closer you become with a man, the more you will be able to separate the man's true self from the social expectations placed upon him. Keep in mind, however, that this might take some time, as most men will not be willing to open up right away. As with most relationships, forging intimacy takes time, whether it's with a love interest or friend. However, as your relationship progresses and you begin to delve into deeper topics about your interests and views on the world, he may be able to let some of those gender scripts go. Method 3. Understanding yourself as a man. Understand the concept of gender role strain. Gender role strain is the stress and anxiety related to a gender role when that role cannot be sufficiently or appropriately met. There are 3 main types. Discrepancy strain. When a person fails to meet typical gender norms. For example, perhaps a man is experiencing depression and decides to seek help. This is a discrepancy with the notion that men should tough it out. Realize that gender role strain can adversely affect men's lives. As a man, you may feel under great pressure to conform to ideals of masculinity. Movies, TV, magazines, and even the people around you all provide cues on how you should act and how a man should be. For example, eating disorders have been increasingly prevalent in men due to social pressures for men to have fit, athletic and toned bodies. Men who don't fit this perfect body type have feelings of low self-worth and in turn punish their bodies for not being perfect. Dealing with social expectations. Because the social expectations of men are so high, men have to find a way to cope with the pressure. Most men cope with social expectations and gender role strain in one of 3 ways. They change themselves to meet social expectations. Changing one's self-identity is not easy, and in many cases men do this to realize the benefits of complying with social expectations. For men, these benefits are numerous, including acceptance from other men, increased self-esteem, and increased social status, among others. Seek counseling. If you ever feel that the strain between who society tells you to be and who you are becomes too much and begins to adversely affect your mental well-being, then you should consider seeing a counselor. A counselor can help you to work through the issues that are bothering you, which may enable you to live a happier life. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends so we can keep making them. For more videos like this, hit the subscribe button and remember to click on the notification bell.